make any progress in the next 11 years. To give you a sense of the landscape, and I'm sure most people in the room here are already aware of this, 25 to 30% of California's demand is served by POUs that largely self-regulate themselves. The remaining 70 to 75% electric demand is CPUC jurisdictional. But within that jurisdictional load, we've had an increase in direct access and a very large increase in community choice aggregation. And the CPUC will soon be only directly regulating the planning, the procurement, and the generation operations of less than half its jurisdictional load, which is about a third at this point in time of California's load. So if we're going to continue to rely on the practices of the past to look to the CPUC to drive results, they're only able to influence 1/3 of the load directly. This legislature put in place not too long ago an integrated resource planning effort. It's called the IRP, and what it requires is the CPUC to get IRPs from all of its load-serving entities. ESPs and CCAs are not required to develop new resources through their IRPs. Their IRPs are advisory. They don't have to follow them if they don't want to. Only the IOUs can be ordered to do reliability procurement. But when we are ordered to do reliability procurement, there is often considerable opposition from CCAs and ESPs. They don't want their customers to have to pay for that reliability procurement. And so that leads to a system that can't function long term. Finally, even though DEA and CCAs will soon be serving more than half the CPUC's jurisdictional load, none of these entities have a reliability function responsibility. Their mission is to bring supply to the table that they think their customers want or they want to serve their customers with, but only the utilities have a reliability function. And if supply should get tight, which we're starting to see, they can return their customers back to the utilities with very little fanfare. Just recently, last summer, we had a CCA that was starting its operations at Desert Clean Energy, 3 cities in the Palm Springs area. With less than a week notice, they informed Edison that they were not going to start their CCA. So even though we had planned on them starting, we had planned on them procuring for their customer load, they didn't start their operation. So these are just indications that our system does not have sufficient enforcement in it to make sure that all load serving entities are accountable to ensure reliability on the system on a long-term basis. We have a resource adequacy program that does it on a year-to-year basis, but what we're talking about is transforming our fleet. And to transform our fleet, we need to be very organized, very systematic to make sure we're doing the absolute best thing we can do for California. So anyway, to wrap up here, because I know I'm up against the clock here, just want to double down on the fact that Edison stands committed to supporting the state in achieving its very ambitious and laudable goals around carbon reduction. We clearly see it as the right thing to do for our communities and to help others across the country, across the world, to see how it can be done. We'll only be viewed as a success story if we can do it reliably and affordably. Towards this end, Edison is already delivering more than 30% of its energy from renewable sources to its customers. We're projected to be over 60% by 2021. We have already contracted for more than 500 megawatts of energy storage, and PG&E a similar amount. Together, Edison and PG&E are clearly the world leaders in procuring energy storage. We are working with the CPUC in our communities to develop the needed infrastructure to electrify millions of vehicles and light trucks, including our ports and heavy trucking. And finally, we're very engaged with our California's technology companies to harness the potential of smart thermostats and appliances. So appreciate your time here. A lot to cover. Sorry, we blazed over it so quickly.
That was a fantastic testimony from all three of you. I'd also like to say that Mr. Cushney gave a great explanation of why I've asked for this briefing today, which is we do not know, those of us in the legislature, whether or not there is a practical plan to balance load. And I'm hoping to hear from panel 3, which is going to bring up the agencies which are state agencies which can do this planning, to hear from them and to understand whether there's any legislation they need and just what the plans are now and what they might be in the future. So I think you've given us a great introduction to panel 3, and I'm hoping to hear responses from that, and I hope that we do develop those plans, because it, as you point out, with so many different people or so many different agencies procuring energy, and with no one really in charge of balancing, what are we going to do? The other thing I wanted to stress is this question of what is happening now as the utilities work with the CCAs. My son works in power procurement for PG&E. His job has been not to procure more power, but to work with people who are currently supplying power and cutting those contracts off because they don't have the customers. And that could already lead to reliability problems by cutting out these natural gas contracts if they're not taken up by other entities. And in fact, the ISO has had to contract directly with natural gas suppliers to keep the lights on, which is something they don't want to be doing. So I think we've definitely introduced potential solutions. We've introduced the problem, which is how do we integrate all of this together? With that, I want to very much thank this panel. You've really set the table for our next panel. So thank you all very much. I want to introduce the next panel, and then I'm going to introduce the Assembly member who has just come here. So the first person we're going to hear from is Nancy Sutney, Chief Sustainability Officer, Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. And then we'll hear from Babu Chamalama, Manager, Energy Storage Technology, Systems Development at Sandia National Lab, and also at Albuquerque. And then Janice Lin, Co-Founder and Executive Director, California Energy Storage Alliance. I want to introduce one of our most important Assembly members in this area. Last year, Autumn Burke brought together a diverse group of people from both parties, from all possible ideologies, to talk about how we would do the cap and trade program. And I think we came up with an excellent program, and her bringing those folks together was a major part of that. So thank you. Do you want to say something, Ms. Burke?
No, I thank Dr. Quirk for his leadership in this area. We've been discussing the future of energy in California for a few years now. So I'm glad we have this committee. Hopefully we're going to continue this committee moving forward, and I look forward to the conversation today. And thank you, Dr. Quirk, for having me.
All right. Ms. Nancy Sutney, Sutley, Chief Sustainability Officer, Los Angeles Department of Water and Power.
Let's see, I have a PowerPoint here. Let's see. Nope.
Just advance past this part.
What's that?
Just advance past this point.
Got it. Okay. Ooh, here we go.
Here we go.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the invitation to be here. Appreciate it, and appreciate you taking on this important subject. And sort of as introduction to talking about sort of how a utility views energy storage, you may have heard yesterday that Mayor Garcetti announced that LADWP would not be proceeding with some planned repowering of some of our coastal power plants. And so this highlights the importance of energy storage in our planning to continue to serve our customers reliably. And so in this presentation, I'll try to run quickly through some examples of technologies that we are both using and looking at both on the utility side and on the customer side. And as we think about energy storage, it offers us a number of important benefits in a cost-effective way, particularly as the cost of the energy storage technologies continues to come down. Helps us manage all renewable energy, both the capacity of the renewable energy and in managing the some of the intermittency, so making it more of a dispatchable energy resource. As you saw in the previous presentation, we're all kind of concerned about how to deal with overgeneration, and so this will give us some tools to do that, as well as minimize when we have to curtail renewables, and also provide important services to the grid itself, frequency regulation, voltage stability, and other things, and help us to get the most out of our transmission system, because new transmission is well, it's mostly difficult to build, particularly in a highly urban area like Los Angeles. And as we are looking at all of this, it's really important, and I know important to all the publicly owned utilities, that as we move towards this zero carbon grid, that we keep in mind the cost to consumers and affordability, and work on ways that we can help to manage that. So we have a number of different goals. Our board adopted a goal under state legislation to get to 178 megawatts of storage by 2020, new storage by 2021. In our strategic long-term resource plan, we sort of renamed our IRP. We are also looking at additional storage, and then there was some legislation last year authored by Senator Stern to ask us to look at the sort of cost effectiveness of storage, particularly to deal with a potential loss of the gas storage at Aliso Canyon. And so for LADWP, we've already done a number of things around storage. We have a fair number of applications and projects on the customer side where people are installing batteries in their business or their homes. We've completed a large battery energy storage system, which I'll show you in a minute. This is at one of our existing solar plants, and we've upgraded our Castaic hydro pump storage plant, which I will show you in a minute. So this is the Castaic hydro pump storage plant. Was built in the 1980s in cooperation with the Department of Water Resources along the State Water Project. And it was originally built to help us to manage both coal and nuclear, so we'd pump up water at night when that was cheap and use it during the day. And we've really both upgraded the plant, but are also converting how we're using it, and now are using it really to help us to manage integrating renewable energy into the grid.
And that amount of storage is in megawatt hours?
That's in megawatts. So it really
so
is.
That's the peak megawatt production of the plant?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, and do you know what the megawatt hour storage is?
I don't, but I can get back to you with it.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. And you may also have seen that we are actually, we also are a participant in the Hoover Power Project at Hoover Dam in Arizona and Nevada. And are looking at the feasibility of doing some additional pump storage at the Hoover Dam. So that's a longer-term project, but something that we are right now evaluating the feasibility of. So this is our Beacon battery energy storage. This is in just north of Mojave, California, northeast of Los Angeles, at an existing solar facility, and it came online last year, and it is doing both sort of just basic storage, but also providing a lot of grid services, and because it's co-located with this both solar and there's a wind project nearby, it's helping us to manage all of that in that part of our renewables, sort of renewable zones. And one thing I would just say for both this kind of utility scale energy storage and things like hydro pump storage, it's important that we consider where existing transmission is, because again, particularly not just building transmission in an urban area, but but also high voltage, long distance transmission lines are difficult to build. So since we have transmission there, this was a good spot to do some additional things. This is another example. This is sort of on a customer side. This is one of our fire stations, the City of LA Fire Department. This is a battery storage, a microgrid system at a fire station up in the San Fernando Valley. That was completed, and again is helping the fire station and us manage their load. And then also in downtown Los Angeles in the Arts District at our La Kretz Innovation Campus, this is a demonstration project of a microgrid plus batteries plus solar on the parking lot, and so helping to both demonstrate the technology and help us to manage the load there. This is just some of the results from the cost-effectiveness study that we were required to do, and it does show that the costs are certainly coming down, and the benefits are significant for energy storage, for both providing energy plus the grid services that storage can provide. And then finally, this is kind of a looking forward technology, the compressed air energy storage. There are a few examples around the world of this, which is where it's already being used. But this is something we're looking at, and part of the challenge is you actually need someplace to store the air as well, and looking at places where there are natural formations that do that, so you don't have to build the place where you can store all the air. And so we're lucky at our IPP, Intermountain Power Plant in Utah, which is a coal plant that's shutting down in 2025, that there's actually salt caverns right next to the power plant, and there's a great renewable potential, wind, solar, geothermal, and hydro, and importantly, there's also transmission, high voltage transmission coming into Southern California from the Intermountain Power Plant that can be used for the renewables as well as the storage. And so we are right now evaluating whether we could do compressed air energy storage at this site, evaluating it through the Southern California Public Power Authority, of which we're a member. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you for that excellent summary. Just a brief question, and I don't know whether you're familiar with the technical details of the compressed air storage, but the big problem is as you compress the air, you end up with heat. Are they looking for ways to use that heat? Do you know if there's any progress being made there?
That's beyond my technical understanding, but we think that we have an ideal spot because we have these salt caverns, and that gives us, some real opportunity to evaluate that kind of technology and see if it's appropriate for that location.
All right, and then we have Dr. Bob. Oh, sure, go ahead.
Well, I have one self-serving question and then one real question. So the scattergood plants that was announced that is going to be closing, it's in my district. So I'm curious what the plans are for that. Is it going to be something geared towards storage, or what is the plan for that space?
Yeah, we are. Thank you. We are evaluating. We looked at a number of options, things that we could do there, and storage is one of those. So it may end up being a combination of storage plus transmission plus something else that gives us the kind of services that we currently get out of having that power plant there. But we certainly are trying to think in a very forward-looking way about what we do there, and certainly would love to come talk to you more about what our plans are.
All right, great, thanks. And then my second question, a little less self-serving. On the storage chart, you showed the cost going down, and what exactly are you attributing that cost going down to? Is it state adoption? Is it general adoption? Is it technology? What is actually bringing that cost down?
Well, I think it's it's probably a combination of all of those things, and as utilities are more and more interested in storage, there's more and more people looking at the technology. I think most utilities see real value in having energy storage. So I think the demand is driving some of it, as well as the just the march of technology. And certainly we've seen this on the renewable energy side, where the costs have come down significantly. So currently, as we look at additional, for example, solar projects, we're finding that solar plus storage projects are coming in pretty cost effectively.
Great. All right, then Dr. Babu Chalamala, Manager Energy Storage Technology and Systems at Sandia.
Dr. Twick and members of the Assembly, thank you for inviting me to brief you today. My name is Babu Chalamala. I manage the US DOE's Energy Storage Program at Sandia National Labs. At the laboratories, we have a broad portfolio of projects in the grid modernization that includes renewable integration, energy storage, microgrids, and a sizable effort in transmission modeling. Sandia has been part of the DOE's energy storage program for about 25 years. And we do this work through R&D at the labs and also through a number of demonstration programs around the country. Within the grid energy storage program, we work on a broad portfolio of technologies that includes basic materials R&D, systems level work, with the goal of making storage competitive across multiple markets. Today, I'm going to brief you on DOE's energy storage program at Sandia, discuss different storage technologies that are available, followed by my personal views on longer-range R&D needs for grid storage. So I think we are at a point, at a cusp of transformation of the grid, and the transformation of the grid to 100% renewables is ambitious.
Just continue to speak into the microphone. You don't need to face me. The main thing is that people can hear you throughout the.
So this transformation is pretty ambitious. There are no insurmountable technological barriers. I think to realize a 100% renewable grid, low-cost storage that can be deployed everywhere is going to be a key. So where are we from the DOE perspective and also from the storage R&D at the labs? The grid storage program is sponsored by the DOE Office of Electricity. And within this office, megawatt storage is one of the key top 5 programs. The DOE Office of Electricity supports a broad portfolio of projects that enables development and deployment of storage technologies. As I said, this includes materials research on new and emerging battery technologies, as well as support for scale-up and commercialization of promising new battery chemistries and component technologies. The program also supports work on power converters, power electronics, to make the power conversion part cost competitive. We also have a sizable effort on safety and reliability of large-scale utility-class energy storage systems. And other things that the industry needs is performance protocols that everybody can reliably use, and standards to support the adoption of new technologies in the grid. The office also supports a range of projects at the state level through demonstrations. Our program at Sandia is broadly in line with the DOE program, and we've also been supporting the California Energy Commission with their work here. We will also work with a number of entities across the state with some of the demonstration projects. So now coming to the range of technologies available and where we're going. Energy storage systems incorporate not only devices to store energy in various forms, but also needs a high degree of integration of power converters, system-level optimization, control architectures, and put all these together so that a utility operator can provide a valuable service. So we need to take a high-level perspective on overall systems aspects, not necessarily the storage component alone. This includes not only looking at battery or energy storage component, but also power converters, the balance of plant issues that we need to consider for all end markets, which are very different from market to market and application to application. That could be, behind the meter to distribution and transmission level deployment storage and bulk. Other aspect is, storage can do multiple things. So we need to have ways to understand the value streams, some monetized, some unmonetized, like resiliency. That needs to be taken into consideration as we look at storage in the bulk grid. As we look at California's mandates towards a grid free of fossil energy generation, we have to focus on cost reductions across all component level technologies, not necessarily the energy storage component. And we have to look at the systems level integration as well as the critical balance of plant issues, which are real. And the regulatory aspects are also real. Currently, if you look at what is available to serve the needs of the grid market, there are no real existing solutions for long duration storage over a time span of days, weeks, and months. That is a big barrier for going towards a 100% renewable grid. I mean, there are opportunities, but they're not there at this point. And also, any single storage technology solution may not satisfy all the market segments, from residential to utility class systems. So you scale from 10 kilowatt hours behind the meter to maybe as big as a gigawatt size plant to replace peakers, and basically generation assets. So we have to have technologies that can scale all these applications and markets. Currently, energy storage systems based on lithium-ion batteries are widely being deployed across multiple end markets. Large plants in the 100 megawatt class are being built. That said, cycle life, safety, and reliability of lithium-ion batteries continue to be concerned for most of the operators, as well as the high cost of lithium-ion battery systems. The current generation of lithium batteries that we are deploying in the grid were not designed for the grid application. They are an outgrowth of what we have been doing in consumer electronics and EVs. These batteries are based on chemistries with high energy density and compact form factors, which are good for EVs and laptops and cell phones, but they're not necessarily the panacea for all the things we are looking for the grid. So utility class applications require scale, and the scales are not there yet. Other thing is deep discharge cycle life of EV batteries at about 1,000 cycles. That's comfortably good for most EVs. And utility operators need something maybe 10x, a lot longer. We're not there yet. Additionally, I think we need to think about the supply chain aspects. I mean, we don't produce EV batteries in this country, and if you're going to depend on imported resources for our grid systems, that's a challenge we need to think about. So we don't want to replace oil with imported batteries. So we need to think about what are the critical technologies that we need to have to modernize the grid. Along with lithium batteries, there is a widespread interest in flow batteries. These systems provide a separation of energy and power that potentially can be scalable for large plants in the 100 megawatt class. This technology is still going through a rapid development cycle and hasn't reached a state of manufacturing scale to bring the cost down yet. So to give you an example, if you look at the overall global production capacity of lithium-ion batteries, it's reaching about 100 gigawatt hours. And the total capacity of production capacity for flow batteries is probably 100 megawatts per year. So the scale is not there to get the cost down, even though it's exciting. Similarly, there's a lot of interest in new technologies like sodium batteries and alkaline batteries, like your dry cells, making them fully rechargeable. However, these technologies are not at scale at this point. For most of the new technologies, the likely production capacity is needed to bring the cost down is in the 5 to 10 gigawatt hour production range. That's where you get the cycle life and cost advantages. So energy storage needs to go through manufacturing cost-driven reductions that the solar guys and the wind guys have seen in the last 20 years. We are not there yet. We also need to look at technologies which can scale for days, weeks to seasonal markets, and those could be hydrogen at scale, thermal storage. Those will come in the picture, and not much work is going on in those areas yet. Okay, most of the focus has been on primarily on the batteries. So now coming to bulk storage. I want to give you a slight perspective on what are the different things that needs to have beyond batteries. So as California looks for 100% renewable future, the complexity of the transition of the electric grid and the associated challenges are daunting. These are not simple. We are trying to transform the grid that we have built over the 100-year period, and it's going to take quite some time. As renewable generation, especially wind and solar, becomes significant, distributed resources managing these assets and the management systems you need to have are not fully there. There are lots of challenges associated with the design of a grid, future grid, which will have distributed generation, on a large scale. And we don't have a unified framework for managing bidirectional power flows at this point. That's an area for a significant amount of research. Currently, if you look at it, if you look at the state, you have a rough peak load of about 30 gigawatts. And transitioning this level of capacity to clean energies is going to require a range of storage technologies, not just one technology is going to work. As we look at the evolution of the grid, I think it's important to see how the grid is going to look like. I mean, there's lots of questions. I mean, is it centralized, distributed, or hybrid? I think what model is going to work, and this will determine what business models are going to require for handling the transformation, and the changes coming mostly from the bottoms up at this point, and on the grid edge. Question is, are we positioned for energy delivery models that may not be in existence today? Do we have the regulatory framework to handle this kind of disruption? Behind the meter is leading. A lot of utilities think about their models, and they're not making investments needed to support large-scale upgrades of transmission distribution infrastructure at this point. And high levels of EV penetration is another major disruption that's coming up. And the utility level storage is probably what is more like a less risky investment approach to transform the grid. Irrespective of how the grid evolves, I think 100% renewable grid will need massive amounts of storage, and the technologies are not there for all the areas that you need. At some point, the grid is going to be different, and we may not see the distinction between a distributed grid or a bulk grid. So we're going to have a model which is going to be very different. We have the ability to handle the bidirectional power flows on a scale that we haven't thought about so far. So there is a lot of science that needs to happen. This also requires a massive communication infrastructure at every point of generation and delivery and end use, along with the reliable market mechanisms to account for the complex power flows, which are not there at this point. Where are we today? I mean, how much storage do we need?
I'm sorry, we're running out of time. Could you just summarize and particularly, sure. So right now our storage that we talk about is primarily on a day time scale. Mm-hmm. And as you summarize, could you also mention where you see the technology where we could do something in California during the winter when we have a storm for a week over most of the state, the winds may be too high to get even wind power. What do we do under those circumstances? What is the future technology?
Okay. So if you look at the big picture, currently we have about probably 2 gigawatt hours of storage in California. On a typical winter day, your demand is about 500 gigawatts hours of electricity demand in a day. And what are the different technologies that we need to have? I think we need to think about a broader picture. Like, are we looking at CASE? Are we looking at modular hydro? Are we looking at batteries? And all of the above. Most likely, I think it's going to be all of the above. We don't have one technology.
Thank you. Thank you. So then we hear from Ms. Janice Lin, co-founder and executive director, California Energy Storage Alliance. And again, if you could address also this long-term question in addition to, obviously, the daily. We have some idea of how to do that. We can do it with current pumped hydro. We can do it with batteries. But this longer-term storage, if you could address that as well. Thank you.
Sure. I'll be addressing that in my remarks. But the short answer is there are other solutions that are theoretically possible, both startup electrochemical solutions that are under development today. And there is also the possibility of using renewable energy to create renewable hydrogen and store that in our existing gas pipeline, which has very large storage capabilities. So I'm going to come back to that in a little bit.
Great. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. My name's Janice Lin. I'm the co-founder and executive director of the California Energy Storage Alliance. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. CESA, just for background, is a 501c6 industry association representing the storage industry in California. Our mission is to make storage a mainstream resource in order to achieve a cleaner, more affordable, reliable power sector for all Californians. CISA represents about 80 companies covering the full spectrum of the storage industry, from very large infrastructure solutions, including hydrogen storage, pumped hydro, all the way down to small distributed behind-the-meter applications in all the subclasses. So I'm here to talk today. I have a few general remarks about storage in general and how to get to 2045. I want to specifically zero in on some of the specific questions around bulk storage that were posed to this panel. And then I'll wrap up with a few recommendations, all in 10 minutes. So achieving a zero carbon grid by 2045, as you heard from the other panelists, is going to require a lot of work, a lot of renewable energy, and a lot of storage. Especially to integrate it. The amount needed and the type of energy storage that will be provided will be a function of many factors, namely the pace of reduction in the gas fleet, secondly, the electrification of other loads, demand-side management, efficiency measures, and of course the mix of renewables deployed, and finally, what shows up will also be a key function of how we design our market, the incentives, the products, and the compensation mechanisms that we develop today. California is going to need many, many types of storage, small and large, short and long duration. The needs of the power sector require significant flexible capacity to meet the various operational challenges of balancing electric supply and demand. Responsible portfolio planning, as we have learned from the stock market and other industries, requires a diversity of solutions to address those needs. No rational person would only have one type of stock in their portfolio. So including diversity, so this means diversity also in the asset class known as energy storage. Remember, it's a broad asset class, and there are many, many types, including a broad range of subclasses, including electrochemical, mechanical, gravitational, thermal, and well, I lump in hydrogen with the electrochemical. One thing we have learned from procurement to date here in California is that energy storage has been, to date, and still is, a no-regrets investment for our state. I'd like to add that thanks to your leadership, California is also a role model of storage market development globally, both throughout the U.S. and around the world. So, why do I say it's no regrets? Because it provides flexibility, not only in the various types of resources, but in the wide range of services that storage can provide. And when I say no regrets, let me bring a specific example. Thanks to the leadership of Southern California Edison way back in 2013, that led our first all-source procurement of storage in a head-to-head competition with many other resources and procured a bunch of energy storage. Thanks to that experience, we learned about procurement and contracting and cost effectiveness and how to compare storage. Only because of that experience was storage a candidate to help California deal with the electric reliability challenge that we were presented with as a result of the methane leak at Aliso Canyon. So learning builds upon learning. I also want to mention that the PUC's leadership in expediting the procurement and installation of about 100 megawatts of new storage capacity in under 8 months should be commended. Finding ways to accelerate regulatory approval for all storage projects would certainly help accelerate market progress and stimulate the private sector's appetite for more investment. So, despite the fact there's a tremendous amount of innovation occurring in energy storage today at all scales, I mentioned the startup that's doing this super long bulk seasonal storage, large and small, CISA strongly supports investing in energy storage near term so that our grid remains flexible and reliable for the changes we know are coming. We know we need a lot more flexible capacity. Also, with energy storage, our grid will be more flexible and the assets we already have will be utilized more efficiently, existing generation, transmission, and distribution. Meanwhile, it's also really important for the state to encourage innovation and new emerging solutions, not only in helping to advance the solutions themselves, as the CEC has so effectively done over the recent years, but also in advancing the market design that enables these emerging solutions to find a toehold and a level playing field to compete. There is one certainty about the future, and that is that the solutions that are available today will be different in the foreseeable future. our market design needs to accommodate this wonderful evolution. Smart market design should allow for a diversity of storage solutions, commercial as well as emerging, to participate in the market, compete with each other and other non-storage solutions, and provide the needed services cost-effectively and reliably. With respect to bulk storage, I wanted to say that there's no generally accepted definition of bulk storage today. From a CISA standpoint, and again, we represent a very diverse coalition, we generally define bulk storage as encompassing a wide range of storage solutions that can provide gigawatt hours of energy storage capability. It's possible to provide this bulk solution from a centralized footprint, as well as it's theoretically possible to provide it from a distributed footprint. It's also theoretically possible to achieve multi-day, multi-week, and seasonal energy storage analogous to how we store fossil fuels today, and that was the renewable hydrogen example I provided in our existing gas infrastructure. There are many specific use cases of bulk storage. I won't cover those because I think my fellow panelists covered those very well. But I did want to say that there are many types of energy storage that can supply these services. Various types of batteries, if aggregated to a large enough size. Thermal storage, again, if aggregated to a large enough size. Pumped hydro and other gravitational energy storage solutions. There's a lot of innovation happening. Compressed and liquid air and hydrogen energy storage. One of the questions that was posed before this panel was, why is there less procurement of bulk storage than other types of storage? So I have a couple of comments about that. I just want to keep track of time, too. One, among the bulk storage solutions mentioned above, there are specific challenges associated both for storage solutions that are very long duration, such as certain types of flow batteries, as Dr. Chamala mentioned. Even thermal storage solutions have very long durations, as well as large infrastructure types of bulk solutions. The challenges are different. For the former category, what I wanted to say about those solutions is it's hard to establish procurement and bankable revenue streams. Most of the storage that's been procured to date in California has been under a 4-hour, multi-year resource adequacy contract for local capacity. If you're a solution that inherently offers 8 hours, it's very hard to secure a bankable revenue stream for hours 4 through 8, for example. So that's a challenge. Secondly, for the latter, very large-scale infrastructure solutions, they face very long project development cycles. Another challenge is their capacity can be too large for any one load-serving entity. Trying to finance a project like that that has a 7 to 10-year lead time requires a forward commitment to make progress. Finally, hydrogen storage, which can be effectively stored in our gas pipeline, as has been shown by several other places around the world. We need to do a lot of regulatory work there to establish injection, blending, and safety standards. And our hope is that that can be undertaken at the PUC very soon. So another question, am I okay on time? I'm going to wrap up in like 2 minutes. Okay. One other question is, when is bulk storage versus distributed storage the right solution? And from CISA's perspective, the answer is not an either or. Our view is centralized, distribute, it's an and. A prudent solution for California, we heard that we're going to need a lot of storage. We're going to need a lot of flexibility. We need it all. So what I wanted to say is, figuring out that particular mix. Again, it depends on, we're actively doing integrated resources planning. We have a very robust transmission planning process led by our CAISO. And the solution really lends itself, that particular mix is what makes the most sense in keeping the grid stable and what's most cost effective for ratepayers. Importantly, when you look at different solutions, it's important to remember the life cycle and the time scale of their life. Some solutions, such as pumped hydro, can have a lifetime in excess of 60 years. So to wrap up, I wanted to say that California will need a significant amount of energy storage solutions. It would be prudent to consider a diverse array. Again, back to my stock portfolio example. Not a good idea to have one stock in the stock portfolio. To achieve our 2045 goals, we're going to need distributed and centralized, large and small, currently commercialized, as well as the new emerging solutions that are being developed today. And that has historically been a strength of California, that innovation. Our system planning work should focus on revealing California's system needs long into the future, beyond 10 years, and in so doing, help guide near-term market design efforts that will allow for many different types of storage and other solutions to compete. Meanwhile, it's important to remember that storage is a no-regret solution, and early procurement can increase overall grid flexibility and our ability to utilize existing assets more effectively. That's where a lot of the savings comes from. Finding ways to accelerate the regulatory approval process for all storage projects, as was done with Aliso Canyon, will help increase market maturation, increase innovation and learning. A faster approval process, for example, could be achieved by evaluating storage projects under an advice letter process versus an application process, for example. Similarly, a key to realizing our future goals is to find ways to directly support capital-intensive and long lead time projects, as well as support technology innovation that encourage these new technologies' use in the marketplace. CESA looks forward to engaging with all key agencies and all of you in evolving our market design so that we'll encourage competition, innovation, and most importantly, the best outcome for ratepayers. And on that note, I do want to issue an invitation to all of you to come to our 10th annual Market Development Forum if you're interested in storage. We have a whole day of storage innovations in Berkeley on February 26th, and on 27th, a whole day of market design innovation on the 27th. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to try and get some staff over there. Let's see if we can get someone to clear their calendar. I know I can't. But I have excellent staff, and if I can get one of them down there, I certainly will. That was a very good presentation. You all had excellent presentations. I am a big fan of hydrogen. I have a hydrogen vehicle. The difficulty is, well, the technologists tell me that they think it is possible to economically produce hydrogen on a large scale, but we have what's known as the Valley of Death. You can develop something in the laboratory, but scaling it up is $1 billion or so, probably. How do we, Ms. Lynn, develop incentives such that that could happen, knowing that the state is very stingy with its money?
Well, I think incentives are certainly part of the solution, as has been shown for every other new technology that comes through. You have to show and demonstrate it's doable. Every jurisdiction needs to do that, though there's many, many projects all over the world. I think your question of scale hits it on the nose, that there are technologies that are commercially available today. The question is, it's so much cheaper when you can do it at very large scale. And what's different today than was different even 5 years ago is the inputs to create renewable hydrogen are so much cheaper, wind and solar. And as a state, we're blessed with a tremendous resource of both, and we can produce it very inexpensively. So then the next challenge is, well, how do you get it from point A to point B? Well, we're also blessed with this amazing, diverse natural gas network, which has been shown in other places around the world can be utilized for hydrogen storage. I mean, there's issues, and I'm not a technologist or a gas expert, but other places have shown that you can put some in there. And so when you think about the convergence that's possible between the power sector and the gas sector, and we have all this existing infrastructure, I think there may be an answer somewhere in there to getting to scale quickly.
Yeah, I will say, well, hydrogen is very tricky stuff to store, and it also causes embrittlement in metals. Another technological challenge, but we probably don't want to choose a technology. We probably want to put a challenge out there and have people develop it. But as you say, with so many different energy procurement agencies, is any one of them big enough? And these are things I hope we can address in panel 3. So those are all great questions. Assemblymember Burke, do you have any questions? It's always a smart
Oh,
question
exactly.
from you.
This one's not. This is an uneducated question. Just bear with me. So what's the largest community that, like you keep saying there's other communities that are running on hydrogen. What's the largest other community that
So
is utilizing hydrogen in their current, or in their original infrastructure?
Okay, so the largest undertaking I'm aware of at a community level, that again, this is I'm aware of, and I am not a hydrogen expert, so disclaimer, is the city of Leeds in the UK. They've actually done a video, you can check it out online, but this is a city that has decided to achieve their climate goals. They want to transform their gas sector and make it 100% hydrogen. They're not there yet, and they're still studying it. They've taken it to a certain level. But that's the one. In addition to that, there are pilots and tests that have happened all over the world on blending and injection. There's a steel manufacturing facility in Austria that's using renewable energy to replace the coke in the steelmaking process, so it has crossover in other industries as well. So instead of coke, you're using hydrogen to make the steel.
I'm sorry.
Leeds is 447,000 people. That's a lot of people.
Yep.
It's actually big. Okay.
It's
I had to look it up. Sorry.
All right. Well, thank you all very much. Excellent. And we are now set up for panel 3 to look at the challenges of planning for the future and what's being done now, what can be done in the future, and is there do you need additional legislative authority? So on panel 3, we have Siva Gunda, Deputy Director, Energy Assessments Division from the California Energy Commission, Rachel Peterson, Chief of Staff to Commissioner Randolph of the California Public Utilities Commission, and Neil Miller, Executive Director of Infrastructure Development from the California Independent Systems Operator. Mr. Gunda.
Good afternoon, Assemblymember Quirk and the advisors. Wanted to also congratulate you one more time for the recognition you received from CCSD. Good afternoon, or still good morning, Assemblymember Burke. So I'm Siva Gunda, for the record. I'm the Deputy Director for the Energy Assessments Division at the California Energy Commission. The Energy Assessments Division is responsible for developing the demand forecast for California, which is typically adopted every year. Every other year, biannually, we actually produce a full forecast, and in the alternate years, we actually just update the forecast. The division is also responsible for developing the production cost modeling, which is a part of methodologies to optimize the grid and understand how different grid builds could potentially affect the overall energy emissions, overall GHG emissions. So I want to just start off with a high-level look at where we are today. On RPS as of 2018, based on the RPS filings data that we have and the 2018 forecast of demand, we currently approximate the total renewable sourced energy that went to Californians was about 34%. As noted throughout the day today, we are looking at the Renewable Portfolio Standard, which is the key vehicle to forward renewables to implement about 60% by 2050 under SB 100, and also looking at 100% carbon-free by 2045. So when I kind of talk about the RPS today, we talk about 5 key elements. So we're looking at solar, wind, geothermal, biomass, and small hydro. So as we move forward to doing more analysis, I just want to touch base or kind of level set on what the CEC is responsible for. As the independent analytical arm in the planning exercise, we are responsible for developing unbiased analysis that could help with the planning. And we do that in a very robust process. We have a stakeholder process through the IPER sessions that we do. And also on the demand side, we have something called the Demand Analysis Working Group, which is a technical forum for the IOUs, LSCs, now including the CCAs, to come in and talk about our methodologies and then the assumptions and also the data that we need. So just kind of looking at the progress we made, the electricity sector GHG emissions in 2016, the latest data that we have from the ARB, it's kind of refreshed about 2 years behind, is about 38%. And energy sector accounted for only 16% of emissions in 2017. As we know, the largest sector now is transportation. If you include the refinery segment, it's about 50%. In 2017, 32% of the electric served from renewables, and about 36% of that came from solar. So the reason I started with those two slides is as we make this progress in California, it is both important to acknowledge the continuing and evolving difficulty in doing the analysis and planning for this, but also the backbone, what actually goes into doing some of this work that we do in California. So the demand forecast, which comes out of the CEC, is an integral part of the Integrated Energy Planning Policy Report. So every year, in 2017 was the full year, 2018 is the update year, we develop the overall energy demand forecast. And that directly flows into two important proceedings. So at the Integrated Resource Planning at the CPUC. So CEC adopts the overall forecast through a stakeholder process and public vetting, and that goes into the IRP as a reference case scenario. Similarly, on the CAISO, it's used for the transmission planning process. So it's important for us to have everybody reconcile around the differences and also agree upon some of the fundamental assumptions we make. There's also a short-term forecasting aspect to what we do, and that goes directly into the resource adequacy. As one of the presenters early on touched upon, 75% of the total load served today is from IOUs, which is under the jurisdiction of CPUC, but that is definitely dwindling, but also recognition that about 20 to 25% comes from POUs today. Here, I just want to elaborate the importance of understanding as we develop the forecast, we need a lot of data, and we do collect that through forms and instructions. We have a very public process on inviting people to provide data to us, but the authority that we have in terms of being able to collect the data is pretty broad, but some of the people that we might have to collect data from in the future are not necessarily accustomed to the processes of the state, so it will be difficult to gather the data moving forward. This is a shot from our 2018 IPER update. I just want to elaborate on this one. This is typically what is published at the end of the forecast. So as you see there are about 3 different lines, and each line is basically the different case that we have. So the low, mid, and high case. So the importance of understanding the distinction between forecasting, projections, and scenarios here. So when we forecast, our hope is to be in a reasonable window of uncertainty. So that can be used for the planning processes. So anything that we cannot do within the bounds of uncertainty that's reasonable typically ends up being a scenario kind of analysis. I also wanted to touch upon slightly on the current work that we do with the IRPs. CEC does have a review process of the overall role of reviewing the IRPs for POUs. This is a very limited oversight that we currently have. We are limited to just reviewing them, and they're also limited to just the top 16, which crossed the threshold of 700 gigawatt hours of average load between 2013 and 2016. So our capability here is to just review and make sure the IRP is complete with the different kinds of things we are looking at, which is whether they've addressed the 40% GHG issue or the 50% renewables by 2030, but we do not really have authority to enforce. We are looking at just giving recommendations. Finally, I want to just close off with one of the slides that we have. This is from 2017, the latest data we have. The ongoing, we have a big challenge in trying to figure out how the mix will play out. But if you look at the top 7 categories, we have about 45% of electricity mix today coming from clean energy sources. And that's in state. So that's definitely not including the out of state. So the in-state mix is about there. So one other thing, those are all the slides I have, but I do want to elaborate on a couple of things. As we conduct our forecast, the place where we are trying to go with the SB 100 goals that we have, or the SB 100 responsibilities we have, which is to develop a joint agency report by January 1st, 2021, is to really develop the forecast at a fundamentally more geographically disaggregated as well as temporally disaggregated fashion, so that we can really understand the intermittency issues and the potential issues that come out of those resource builds. So as an agency, as a group, the assessments division is really looking at gathering the appropriate data, being in touch with the market, being very collaborative with the stakeholders to gather the data and do the best objective modeling we can do to forecast.
What does it say about natural gas?
Just a second. Just make sure you're speaking into the microphone so we can hear you.
What does it say right above natural gas? I just can't see what it says.
It's waste heat.
Waste.
It's like
Okay, thank you. So we've now heard about the forecast, and I'm hoping we will hear from the Energy Commission and the ISO. We just heard from Edison that basically only the POUs, the IOUs are responsible to the Energy Commission, and the IRP is Integrated Resource Plan is optional for the CCAs. So you've just been through this. How are we going to make sure we have a balanced load?
All right. Good morning, Assembly Member. Thank you very much for having me here, and good morning to both of you. My name is Rachel Peterson. I am the Chief of Staff for Commissioner Leanne Randolph at the California Public Utilities Commission. It has been a very interesting morning. I might not agree with Mr. Kushner from Edison on all the particulars that he said, but there's definitely...
That's a relief.
There's definitely a lot here that we can talk about. Commissioner Leanne Randolph is the lead commissioner for both the Integrated Resource Plan proceeding and the Resource Adequacy proceeding. So hopefully, I mostly prepared my remarks to talk about the zero carbon grid by 2045, but I'm anticipating that we can have a conversation about near-term reliability and long-term planning too. So what I wanted to do today was just provide you with an update on where we are in the IRP process, what our staff's analysis of the plans and procurement portfolios that have been submitted to us for the 2030 resource mix look like, and then some of the new studies that we're launching to examine the implications of SB 100 and the zero carbon grid in 2045. So this is our slide that we've used quite a bit during the 2-year process that we're reaching the end of right now. We are about to produce a proposed decision in March for the commissioners to vote on in April that will propose a 2030 resource mix that is updated from the resource mix that they looked at about 1 year ago. So when they do this, that will effectively set a barometer against which load-serving entities like the CCAs, the IOUs, and the ESPs need to plan for 2030. And so also once we set that resource mix, then we look again at the question of whether procurement and new policy are needed to get us towards that 2030 future. And just so we're all, I think it's been mentioned a few times, but SB 350 introduced integrated resource planning to California a couple of years ago. It has three pretty equal targets. One is to reduce our GHG emissions in the electric sector by 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. Another is to do that with reliability in mind, so the electric system must continue to serve California safely and reliably. And the last is to minimize bill impacts even while we accomplish those pretty ambitious goals. And when I go through sort of our analysis today of what our staff has looked at, I want to note that we have vetted the kind of early results of our plans pretty much all along the way through series of workshops, webinars, rulings. The parties have been extremely engaged in this process. So about a year ago, in February 2018, the Commission did adopt the first indicative reference system portfolio. And while they were doing that, they set an electric sector total emissions target of 42 MMT, which responds to the SB 350 goal. That electric sector target showed us in our analysis that we needed a total new energy resource amount of about 10,000 megawatts of renewables and 2,000 megawatts of storage. And included in that is about 200 megawatts of geothermal. So that was the first indicative portfolio that we issued to the load-serving entities and said, here's an illustrative portfolio of what the state will need in 2030 to meet the mandates of SB 350. Please prepare your integrated resource plans that respond to this portfolio. And notably, this portfolio did not select any new natural gas plants or pumped storage. Yes.
Could you go back to that slide? Yes. So the red at the bottom is
Geothermal.
Geothermal. Okay, so that's very large. That seems to be a large increase in geothermal then?
Well, this will be added to the existing resource mix. It's not it was about 200 megawatts of new geothermal resource.
All right.
And I can't remember off the top of my head how much we have existing right now.
All right, so that would have to, okay. And just in conversations I've had with, admittedly a couple of years ago with one of the IOUs, they're concerned about the cost of geothermal as being relatively high. I can understand why you want it because it would serve base load and probably make it easier to integrate. But and then after the red, you then have a couple of other lines. Could you say what they are?
Wind, solar, and battery storage, if you're looking at the 2030.
So the question is then, who's going to procure those? I mean, that's great, but you have, I don't know, 40 or so CCAs, maybe 100 by 2030. How do you do this?
You're leading straight to my next slide.
Oh, good.
Wait, so before.
I'm glad I set that up for you.
Right. I just want to add a question to his is on that 2030 slide when in reference to geothermal being more expensive and, battery storage being where it is or where you project it to be, what do you think the percentage rate increase on a ratepayer's bill are we looking at when we get there? So if you want to add that.
Good question.
Add that in.
It is a good question, and I would probably have to consult with staff back home and get back to you on that. And just to note, this is a modeling result, so the model is evaluating operating conditions, costs, GHG emissions in 2030, and then selecting resources. So you're exactly right, sir, that the attributes of geothermal operating as a 24/7 GHG-free baseload resource allowed it to be selected by the model more frequently than other resources in this case. We did, in fact, run a special study related to pumped storage in this initial cycle and found that the model selected it only under sort of more stringent conditions, either where there was a no curtailment constraint placed in it, so it was selected instead of curtailing other renewables, or when we shifted the sector target down to 30 million metric tons, which I'll actually get to for studies for our next cycle.
So your model then was looking at the least cost?
Yeah, we try to say least cost, best fit, because it's not always the absolute least cost.
Okay, but the reason you were selecting batteries is you felt that that would be, or your model was selecting that it would be cheaper than pump storage.
Well, so every input that we use, every cost input that we use in the model is from a public source of data. So we use what we know, what the world knows about the cost of batteries, and that's why we feel more comfortable saying that there's been publicly vetted sources of data about the assumptions.
For both pumped hydro and...
For every resource that's in the model, yes.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so the Commission approved that 2030 indicative resource mix along with the sector emissions target of 42 million metric tons in February. And then we tossed it over the fence to the load-serving entities that existed at the time in California. So on August 1st of last year, 43 load-serving entities submitted plans. And this is sort of the aggregated results of those plans. And you can kind of clearly see a few of the conclusions that we have drawn and we've spoken about in workshops. First of all, CCAs are by far planning the greatest amount of procurement. When you look at the plans in aggregate, there is less geothermal, less wind, and less natural gas generation from resources within CAISO's balancing area. That means that the portfolio draws significantly more on unspecified imports to make up that gap. Those unspecified imports have a higher emissions profile, and so overall, the emissions results for this portfolio do not in fact meet the Commission's adopted target of 42 million metric tons for the sector by 2030. The portfolio is generally reliable, and then unfortunately we have some modeling improvements to do, so as to a cost comparison, I can't unfortunately provide you a cost comparison.
So, but this illustrates the concern about balancing load and reliability and still meeting those 2030 goals.
You're exactly right.
Okay.
Yes. So what our job remains is for the Commission to decide which portfolio it prefers to continue to use as the 2030 portfolio to close out this cycle of the IRP. And that's what's coming. I can't say much more than that because that's what's coming in March.
Okay, thank you.
And then so my last slide is just about some of the studies that we are about to launch in this next IRP cycle in order to look at the implications of SB 100. So in IRP, we will always ask those questions: what resources are needed to reduce GHG emissions in the electric sector? What is the optimal portfolio of resources under alternative futures? And what investments or actions should we take in the short term? The planning targets we are preparing to set for analysis now start with 42 as the upper bound. It was the middle target in the last cycle, so now we're starting with that as our cannot go above. And we'll look at 36 and 30 million metric tons as well. And then we're using the CEC's deep decarbonization study to look at 3 other long-term scenarios by 2045: high electrification, high biofuel, and high hydrogen as a natural gas replacement. And then last, we have several further studies. These were all described in a ruling we just issued this past Monday that deal with some of the urgent policy questions that we know are floating around. For example, the question of orderly gas fleet retirement, building electrification, and then, like some panelists spoke about earlier, transportation electrification in which you can use that load in a flexible way. Thanks very much, and I'm happy to have further dialogue.
All right. So we still have the question, which perhaps we'll find out more in March, about who is going to be asked to make sure the grid is balanced. Because the IOUs are not going to be able to procure a lot more resources because the CCAs are taking the energy load. It really, and the CCAs by and large are pretty small organizations, so it's not at all clear how we meet those goals with the current mix of retailers.
I think you've pinpointed the problem. There's definitely a tension there. We do feel that we have certain amount of authority that perhaps others don't always agree with, but that's a tension that's going on in California, yes.
Yeah. I'll also say that I have previously heard from the people who are pump storage advocates that the lifetime that was assumed for the pump storage was 25 years. They prefer to say it's 60 years, which is what I heard from LADWP. You may or may not be familiar with those details of the model.
You're right. I don't know exactly what our model would assume, but kind of as some other folks said earlier too, we have to focus on 2030 in part because the law requires us to. Now we're shifting our attention to both 2030 and 2045 because of SB 100. So the longer the planning horizon in which you're asked to look at these things, then it makes more sense to look at longer lifespans that resources may have.
That's excellent. Thank you. All right, then we now have to hear from Mr. Miller, Executive Director of Infrastructure Development from the California Independent Systems Operator. Seems like a good person to have here today.
Great. Well, thank you. First off, thank you very much for having me and giving the ISO a chance to participate in today's session. Given the details on some of the forecast inputs that have already been talked about on these panels, I was going to spend just a bit more time talking about the ISO process, on how the different inputs get coalesced into a transmission plan by the ISO. First, just to be clear, every year the ISO does a comprehensive transmission plan focusing on three main areas of the need for transmission reinforcement: grid reliability, upgrades that may be required to successfully meet the policy goals of the state, and any economic projects or upgrades to projects that would provide ratepayer benefit by reducing overall costs. Our assumptions are heavily keyed on the Energy Commission's energy demand forecast and the Public Utility Commission's forecast for resource needs, especially for the kind and potential location of renewable resources, and that's been the main driver over the last few years. We do have a 10-year outlook in our transmission plan, and that is considered a reasonable balance of the certainty and uncertainty with some of the factors, as well as the time it would reasonably take, with 10 years being the reasonable worst case for actually putting transmission infrastructure in place. It is a collaborative, open stakeholder process. I should mention as well, though, that the results of the transmission plan, when our Board of Governors approve projects, someone is compelled to actually try to get the project built. So it's not a theoretical study, it's the actionable step to initiate transmission permitting processes and for someone to develop an application and bring it before the relevant siting agency. That's particularly important because the inputs we're relying on have to be defensible to supporting a permitting application. Now, I mentioned the coordination we undertake with the state agencies. This is a bit of a staged process of, first off, the Energy Commission forecast being sort of the start of it all. That forecast feeding both into our annual transmission planning processes as well as the CPUC's resource needs, resulting in procurement plans coming through the CPUC that then cycle and to some extent start all over. So there is this incremental approach year after year, looking at the 10-year horizon in subsequent cycles. Now, like I said, the transmission plan itself is the basis for initiating expansion transmission planning. So when we take that transmission plan, after those projects are assigned to a transmission owner to develop, then we will end up supporting the need for those projects in later permitting cycles. The transmission planning process itself, though, even though it's called the transmission plan, our Board of Governors' authority to approve projects is limited to transmission projects themselves. We do, however, study a wide range of potential alternatives, preferred resources, conventional resources, and storage occasionally fitting into the different categories of all of the above. Now, if we do see that there's a solution that is not a transmission wire solution that would be better overall, we don't have the authority to approve that in any context, but we do then work with the relevant state agency to try to get that resource developed, with our backstop, unfortunately, being transmission. And I say unfortunately because it often has one of the longer lead times. So we do have to take into account the lead times of the facilities we're working on to get certain projects built and in place, and at the same time manage that uncertainty on some of the forecast inputs. Besides the studies that we undertake for mandatory standards compliance and transmission approval, we have over the last number of years also done some exploratory studies trying to get ahead of the curve on some of the issues we're dealing with, and studying over the years some of the potential impacts of larger gas fleet retirement on system reliability, as well as the benefits that some storage facilities would also provide. Now, we are not looking at the capacity value of those resources, but we would look at what sort of market revenues they would generate. And through that analysis, we haven't found an economic case to proceed with storage facilities unless they're part of this larger capital capacity program being managed at the state level. So that's some of the material we produce each year in trying to help get ahead of the curve, and also to help inform the Public Utilities Commission's processes in the IRP, where we also participate. That's a bit of a high-level overview of our planning process, and I'd be pleased to help with any questions.
Thank you very much. That was a quick summary, which I think identified many issues. So it's interesting that you found, which is perhaps not surprising, that the pump storage and batteries are going to bring up costs relative to, say, just continuing with what we're doing now. I do think it would be important for you to look out to 2045. I know that there is uncertainty as to what demand and other things will be, but bulk storage, developing technology for hydrogen, developing larger reservoirs for pump storage, those are very long-term issues.
Yes.
And we don't even know what the economics of say, hydrogen will be. And so I know there's a lot of uncertainty. The other thing is, who would be, so if pump storage and batteries and hydrogen, these other things are looked at independently of a portfolio, it's not surprising that they're not economic.
Right.
So how do we, and this is a question for Rachel Peterson, Ms. Randolph, how do we integrate all of this together when we have 50 or 100 CCAs doing most of the procurement because the investor-owned utilities are not able to procure more because they're losing all their customers. So I know you'll say you're going to be looking at that in March, but are there any ideas at the current time?
Well, the law right now does give the CPUC the authority to review and certify each IRP that was submitted. So we are planning to use that authority, I think it's safe to say. But I think that it's worth a dialogue at the state level about how all the individual entities can be included in the overall and very ambitious state goals.
All right. So I didn't expect from this hearing that we'd have a solution today, but at least we've defining the problem. And I'll be looking forward to your March report as well as ongoing dialogue in this area. And the state agencies do need to come to us if there is additional authority that they need. It is not at all clear to me how we develop new technology, how we, with so many different entities, do something like pipe storage. Batteries, sure, but batteries are not going to take care of the long-term seasonal problems. So we definitely have a day-night problem, balancing the load. We have services, meaning keeping the cycles per second close to 60 and keeping the power balance in the alternating energy system. But these seasonal balances, these longer term, definitely is going to take a statewide effort. You certainly can't ask any one CA or what's left of the IOUs. I'm not even sure they, without, I don't know, substantial increases in their cost of what they do supply in terms of transmission, I just don't see how you do it. So I look forward to the solutions you come up with. That being said, I think we can ask you to sit down, and thank you for bringing. Oh, there is one other question I had for Ms. Peterson. The representative from Edison said that the IRPs are suggestions. Do you want to comment on that?
Sure. One benefit we have is that we are running the IRP in 2-year cycles, so we're about to finish this one, and then we'll use everything that we have learned from the first cycle in the second one. So we will hopefully continually make progress towards eliminating unknowns and clarifying further what each entity's responsibility will be. So, you know, to use the word indicative right now is probably somewhat fair given that it's the end of our first cycle. But at the same time, we have been very clear in our public workshops that where the entities submitted plans that were kind of entirely, they actually told us that they were not based in specific contracts, they were not based in specific projects. We've made clear that we expect the next round of plans to be grounded in actual contracts, actual investments, actual known procurement. So that's just one example of how we'll continue to kind of try to remove the gray areas in the IRPs.
So that gives you information, but do you have authority?
It comes down to the language in the statute and then the kind of persuasive authority that those of us who work at the state level have. I mean, every time I meet with a CCA representative or an ESP representative, I remind them of the state goals and that they are part of the state. And
so you don't have the authority?
I can't speak for the entire commission, clearly.
Okay, so it's an unknown.
We're going to do whatever we can to clarify our authority.
Okay, I would be very interested in that answer when it's available. The other thing is, in terms of procurement, it'll be very hard to say to the CCA in Contra Costa County that has, I don't know, 200,000 customers, you need to procure geothermal. Or to other smaller CCAs, even Marin, which has been, well, I guess Marin is now joining with some other agencies, so they'll be bigger. But by and large, there's an awful lot of smaller CCAs that really can't procure geothermal or these other resources. So we're going to need more planning, more tools. And I'm willing to say that this is more or less what I expected to learn, but it's good now to have that out in public. And again, you have to let us know what we as a legislature need to do to assure that you have the authority you need and to meet these goals and to do this planning, which has to be done at the state level, again, because we are dealing with so many small entities. All right. Well, thank you all very much, and we'll have public comment. I'll give a minute for those who want to leave the room, and then we'll have public comment. All right, looking at the number of people for public comment, we will have no problem giving you each 2 minutes, and I can give you a little bit more time if you really need it. For the microphones, why don't we, can we, yes, it's being set up. So I do want to thank, while I've got a minute here while we're setting up, Nathan Little and Amy Gilson, my two very capable, I love them both very much, legislative aides, who have done a fantastic job bringing you all here together, giving me an outline and an understanding and something that we will be spreading to the rest of the legislature in terms of what's known now, what isn't known, and trying to find out what we can do to help. So we can now, let's make sure the microphone works. And oh, it does. Great job, Nathan. All right, please go ahead.
Needs a raise. Thank you, Mr. Quirk, for putting this on. A very instructive briefing. My name is Carl Zakella. I'm with the Natural Resources Defense Council. Worked last year on a lot of the legislative efforts on a regional grid integration. I wanted to just mention that this subject was not raised today as an option as we start to think about how we're going to meet these rather...
What subject?
Regional grid integration expansion.
Oh, yes. It was not. I love it. And I think it could be part of the solution, but right now we're stalled.
Yeah, I understand. I just wanted to raise a few of the issues around keeping this on the table because it is one of our least cost alternatives to getting there. As the deep decarbonization study from the Energy Commission shows, we're going to need to do some procurement from around the region. And for the balancing issues that you raised yourself here, we have uncorrelated variability in renewables from around the West that could serve a very powerful role for us in being able to retire some of the gas plants we seek to retire and to do that in a cost-efficient way. We also have better political alignment than we had last year, where we have now the governors of many states in the West agreeing with us on very harmonized on the kinds of goals they have, long-term decarbonization of their economies. That gives us another opportunity, and also I think we're at somewhat of a better position politically with the national government with the House of Representatives having turned over. So I realize we're stalled at the moment, but this is something I think we're going to need to keep on the table. And as we have increased our goals to 100% decarbonization, we are going to need this tool, and we can't leave our best tools on the workbench. Thanks.
Thank you. As usual, the NRDC makes very good technical arguments. Next.
Hi, I'm Melissa Brandt on behalf of East Bay Community Energy. We're a CCA serving customers in Alameda County and 11 of its cities. And I just wanted to speak to some of the issues that were raised here today. To start, I wanted to make sure that everyone's aware that 6 CCAs have so far signed long-term contracts for over 2,000 megawatts of new renewables. You have a lot more large CCAs that have come on board recently or are coming on board, including EBCE, San Jose Clean Energy, and the Clean Power Alliance in Southern California. And so these CCAs are by no means small. So you're going to be seeing a lot more procurement ramping up very quickly. CCAs are willing and able to procure, just need to be given the mandate directly, and we will go and do our part and find a way to comply. I think you mentioned geothermal, for example. That's something we can do. The storage mandates we were given was kind of an after the fact. The IOUs bought first, and then we had our storage mandate to the extent they didn't meet them. They exceeded theirs in certain instances, which left us with nothing to buy, but we're happy to do our part. Monterey Bay Community Power and Silicon Valley Clean Energy have approved some of the largest solar plus storage procurement in the state recently in Kings County and in Kern County. And this is a great example of how CCAs can come together to invest big. Clean Power Alliance also just invested in 100 megawatts of standalone storage. So we are buying, we're going to continue to buy. EBCE is seeking multi-hundreds of megawatts of new renewable energy, and we're looking to add storage to some of those deals. Regulatory uncertainty in the RA proceeding has been somewhat of a barrier, but we're also, as an example, partnering with PG&E on the Oakland Clean Energy Initiative, which is going to enhance reliability while bringing clean energy storage to downtown Oakland. So we're looking for creative opportunities to partner or to lead in developing solutions to decarbonizing the state's capacity fleet. It's a hard problem to solve, but we're at the table and we want to be part of the solution. We're also looking at demand-side programs to help deal with electric reliability and to help phase out GHG emitting capacity. We're embracing enhanced use of DERs in our community, including transportation electrification, demand response, energy efficiency, and we're exploring big data and how we can evolve our rate structures as tools to help. Also wanted to mention that our governance structure, it's not that no one's in charge, but rather that our local boards set our policies and we're required to follow those. Our local boards are very engaged and hands-on in terms of determining what it is that we buy. We're also required to submit IRPs, and while this was the first year in the first cycle, as the CPUC representative mentioned, we're continuing to participate in that process actively at the PUC, and we look forward to that continuing. I think
okay,
I will.
You've gotten to about 3 minutes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. We look forward to continuing to contribute.
Thank you as well.
Thank you for having us today. I'm Bob Raymer, a senior engineer with the California Building Industry Association. And we certainly agree with your observation that financial incentives, the state can be pretty stingy. Recently, for the last two updates of the CEC's energy regs, we've looked to a more innovative incentive, and that is a regulatory type of incentive. Probably the best example going forward for the 2020s, you probably are aware, the Energy Commission's regs will now require a renewable component on all new homes and apartments, slow-rise residential. But they also recognize it's going to create some grid harmonization issues, at least some potential issues. And so we were able to work with the Energy Commission to put into the standards an energy storage compliance credit that we can use when complying with the energy regs. It doesn't involve a direct transmission of funds from the state to the builder. It's simply, as we develop our energy budget, we get credit for putting in this what's still expensive technology. But this is a type of thing that can be used. Also, in addition to grid harmonization, it's going to help the homeowner sort of hedge against time of use rates that are coming online. So as we go forward past 2020, there's going to be a heavy demand for this. So once again, this was a non-financial way that the Energy Commission found to promote energy storage at the micro level. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very helpful, and I'm very. We heard from Dan Dunmoyer, your CEO, at the California Foundation for the Environment and the Economy, a number of innovative ideas on how to reach the CEC's goals that I think are very important. So thanks for your contribution.
Thank you.
Patrick Welch with the California Municipal Utilities Association. Want to thank the Assembly member and his capable staff for hosting this conversation today. We have a few comments before I do. I just want to address one of the panelists asserted that POUs are self-regulated. That's not entirely true. POUs are subject to a variety of state laws and federal standards. POUs coordinate very closely with the state's energy planning agencies and are governed by locally elected city council members or independent board members. We believe that local control is actually the foundation of our members' success to be able to deliver sustainable, affordable, and reliable power. So I wanted to put that on the record. Appreciate the conversation. Sorry.
That's very good. We heard.
Appreciate the conversation today. We believe that utilities have to have the flexibility to keep planning for these goals that the state has set, and we believe these types of conversations are important to facilitating achievement of those goals. It's really important that the state keeps an eye on affordability. There's a lot of reliance on the electric sector to achieve many of the state's carbon goals, for example, deployment of EVs. We need to make sure that while the electric sector is moving towards 60% RPS and then eventually planning for 100% zero carbon, that we're keeping an eye on affordability so that the electric sector can continue to be relied on to meet other portions of the state's goals too. And we look forward to continue the conversation with your office and with the legislature.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Again, SB 100 did call for a de minimis change in costs as well as the same level of reliability. And if we can't meet those goals, then we're going to have to, if we can't do that, then we're not going to be able to get there to 100% renewables. So.
Good afternoon, Chair Quirk. My name is Jim Bach, and I represent STEM Incorporated. We're the we operate the world's largest digital energy storage network with over 900 systems deployed on commercial office buildings and industrial facilities and schools throughout the country and in Canada and in Japan as well. Our systems operate in unison as virtual power plants and can be dispatched to provide grid services as well as customer savings. In fact, we have a contract with Southern California Edison to provide 85 megawatts of local capacity requirements, and we're participating over the last 3 years, have participated in the demand response auction mechanism to provide demand response at the wholesale level. And we've been dispatched over 1,000 times in the last 2 years in the day ahead and the real-time markets as part of an effort to try and help meet the state's critical energy needs during heat wave events, all automatically without any customer intervention. So we ask that you keep in mind as you consider zero carbon resources that behind the meter distributed energy storage, either standalone or in cooperation with other forms of distributed resources, can be utilized to meet the state's needs to decarbonize the grid. And this is a fast-growing, customer-driven resource, and we ask you to consider leveraging this resource as part of that solution for the state's needs.
And I agree with you very much. It's also probably the least expensive way to balance load. You represent, again, the...
STEM Incorporated. We're an energy storage developer. So we develop software to optimize, deploy energy storage using advanced artificial intelligence and machine learning and cloud-based software to optimize all of our systems acting in unison as virtual power plants.
And something that the ISO could dispatch?
Yes, actually, we are being dispatched in the real-time market at 5-minute intervals under the demand response auction mechanism right now, and have been done over the last 3 years, been dispatched over 1,000 times in that real-time market as well as the day-ahead market.
Thank you so much. That's great, a great contribution to the state
and
it meeting its goals. All right.
Thank you, Assemblymember and staff. I'm Erin Rodriguez with the Union of Concerned Scientists. Union of Concerned Scientists believes this bold new clean energy goal is ambitious but necessary to meet the state's limit on global warming pollution. We believe it is achievable, but will require a diverse array of solutions to reduce the reliance on fossil fuels, meet climate and clean air goals, and ensure grid reliability, all of which UCS wants to underscore should be done equitably. UCS agrees that generating renewable electricity from a diverse mix of sources, investing in energy storage at various timescales and locations, and shifting electricity demand to better coincide with renewable electricity production will be important to getting to 100%. Additional strategies include planning for an orderly and equitably transition away from the natural gas generation, using renewable generation technologies to provide grid reliability and services, and enabling greater integration of Western electricity markets. Advancing these key solutions will require robust and cross-sectoral communication, information sharing, and investment planning. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning. Catherine Brandenburg representing Sonoma Clean Power. As you know, Sonoma Clean Power is a CCA, and it represents, and it has been a CCA for the past 5 years. It represents Sonoma and Mendocino counties. And there's just a couple things I'd like to clear up. Melissa, who spoke earlier, did touch on this, but I wanted to make sure you knew that IRPs are not advisory for Sonoma Clean Power. What they are is the CPUC mandates them for the IOUs, and our governing board is what mandates what we purchase for Sonoma Clean Power. So it was a little slippery when in the conversation. So
I think you've made a great point there. You have to respond to your board. I will also mention that Sonoma Clean Power is one of the few agencies which is buying geothermal.
I was going to touch on that also. We have 50 megawatts of geothermal, and it's a community, and so we buy as a community, and that's in the community, so that's why we purchase it. It is more expensive. Geothermal, we all know, is very expensive, but because it's part of the community, we want to make sure we purchase what is correct. And I just wanted to also point out that it was false that the CCAs are not required to procure renewable resources. So that comment was made, and yes, we are required, just as the IOUs through our governing boards. And we have built over 120 megawatts of wind power, 72 megawatts of solar, and 20 megawatts of battery storage. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention.
Yeah, and I do appreciate that both CCAs that have spoken so far are doing their best. The problem is, how do we coordinate on a statewide basis? And it's not clear how we do that yet.
Right. And I think your next informational hearing, it would be great to have the CCAs here to have that conversation.
Sounds good to me.
Thank you.
I would like to thank you for hosting this important briefing. My name is McLean Momo. I'm a research assistant for the California Low Carbon Fuel and Energy Coalition.
Just relax. I'm a friend, honest.
I am not a public speaker.
It's
I didn't
okay.
know I was going to be doing
Neither
this.
was I 15 years ago when I first stood in front of the city council. I can assure you I was more nervous than you are.
Thank you very much. Our coalition's board focuses on accelerating emission reductions across sectors, including decarbonizing the grid. We believe it's essential to combine load management, efficiency, localized and grid scale storage, and also balancing distributed and grid scale clean energy. Within the energy mix, it's also critical to have a balanced portfolio that reduces pressure on curtailment and provides non-energy emission reductions across other sectors while reducing grid strain and enhancing resilience. Resilience requires a combination of technologies, balancing strategies, and making best use of regional resources. We look forward to continued focus on resources broadly address decarbonization and to comprehensive strategies to move all of California together to meet our 2030 goals early and go forward from there.
Excellent. I really enjoyed your presentation. Next time, you'll be a veteran.
Thank you.
My name's Nate Sandvig with National Grid. I just appreciate your leadership. National Grid, we run the grid in the UK, largest transmission network in the Northeast. Very encouraged with this discussion today. It's again great to see your leadership. Earlier in the day here, we talked about other grids, and I think just to echo another point with thinking regionally in terms of cooperating in coordination with other grids and not limiting our decarbonization just to California. And then looking to the northwest where we have existing hydro and also new pump storage hydro in terms of where pump storage is. These projects are kind of like Goldilocks. You need just the right thing. So there's some great sites in the northwest, and you don't necessarily need to build transmission. Looking at the high voltage transmission system, the AC/DC interties, which were built in the 60s to work seasonally with the Northwest, and now as we move into a grid where we're looking at sub-hourly, these transmission lines will ideally have better value if we better utilize the use of them and think about where the best resources are and where the most cost-effective resources are to integrate the grid. And then lastly, just something we've been thinking about is kind of a study in terms of what the grid needs and where these things are, and convening maybe the CPUC, CEC, CalISO to think about again what the grid needs and what sort of resources, where the best resources are, and how we do it regionally. Washington State is looking at 100% RPS also, and Oregon has a 50% RPS. So if you look at where the transmission is in states that are aligned, they call it kind of the blue wall. Oregon, Washington, California can demonstrate some leadership as we look east. lastly, just look forward to any ideas around procurement and how we encourage investment. National Grid in the UK is building $1 billion undersea cables to connect, at the same time Brexit, but to connect the other countries of Europe, and they're off the balance sheet because we have long-term contracts for a lot of these projects. So in terms of encouraging investment, big utility looking for opportunities to invest, and again, look forward to next steps.
Do you want to take about 30 seconds to explain what National Grid is to the audience here?
Well, probably no different than some of the other utilities, but we, in the National Grid in the UK, we run the grid, in terms of the systems, the transmission system, that's what we run. And in terms of deregulation, the UK was one of the first countries to look at this, and, it kind of took shape in other countries a little bit differently. And then in the Northeast, we bought several utilities and put them together and called it National Grid. So it's in terms of the high voltage transmission system. We have a few legacy assets when it comes to generation on Long Island that are natural gas, and we're looking at possibly batteries for.
I see. We have a grid here we could sell you cheap. Just have to worry about forest fires. But other than that.
I think when I was explaining to some of my colleagues in the UK about the challenges just broadly as we decarbonize, he said, Churchill said, you Americans are right. We'll get to the right solution eventually after we exhaust all the other alternatives. So.
All right, that was just a joke about buying our transmission lines. All right, thank you very much. This has been excellent. If the presenters can send us any of and the people who have made public comment can send us any of their comments, we'll put it on my Assembly website. And I learned a lot today. The other Assembly members who were here are very involved in this question, and we stand ready to try and help with future solutions. So thank you all very much.
No, actually, I have to grab my other stuff. I'll wait for you. No, there was a person before you. Oh, yeah. You're welcome. It's an excellent briefing.